Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book-to-show comparison for the Expanse Season 4, Episode 3, Subduction. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare episodes of the Expanse to its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well I think these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to Season 4, Episode 3. So if you haven't seen this up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't read the books, not to worry, there will be no spoilers beyond Season 4. So our episode begins where the last one left off. Right after Mercury shot Coop in the head, Scotty is defiant and threatens Mercury, asking if he's going to shoot them all. Wei joins Mercury along with all the RCE security forces that stand with Mercury and point their guns at the Belters. However, the Belters all come together and cluster around Scotty, who asks if Mercury intends to kill them all. Carol Chiwiwi comes to stand beside Scotty and scolds Mercury for murdering a man in cold blood, but Wei warns the Belters to back off as she points her gun at them. Amos is watching this play out from afar when he gets a call from Holden, who tells him that everyone should take cover because lightning is about to hit the settlement. Amos asks how he can know this, but before he gets an answer, lightning does hit the settlement and everyone runs and ducks for cover, the coming conflict forgotten or at least put on hold. Alex explains to Amos that Miller turned something on, and Amos explains to Holden about Mercury shooting an unarmed man in the head. Naomi is appalled no one did anything about it, but Amos explains that they were interrupted by the lightning. Naomi promises to come to the settlement to help repair the damage. So in the novels, as I explained in previous videos, Mercury killed Coop when Holden first arrived on Illis in front of everyone. There was no lightning that hit the settlement in the novels. Also, the Belters' response was less menacing, as they knew they were clearly outnumbered by the RCE security forces. Instead, they played the victims and waited to hatch plans to take down Mercury's team in secret. So this works fine for what the show established, although it does portray the Belters as not as smart by trying to start a fight they clearly would lose, whereas in the books they're much smarter to regroup and try to hit them back when it's more effective. Also, this is the second time the show used the trick of having a protomolecule related event interrupt when the RCE security forces and the Belters are about to attack each other, which is a bit convenient and overuse of the trope, so I'm going to give this a -2. We then see Holden and Alex talk about the lightning event. Alex asks Holden if he wants a minute alone so he can talk to Miller, but Holden refuses, saying that if Miller cared what happened to them, that he would have warned them about the settlement, so he declares they're on their own. He tells Naomi that he and Alex are going to stay out there to see if they can find a way to turn off what Miller turned on. So in the novels, it went down quite differently. First off, nor the bugs or the lightning existed in the novels. Sure, Miller was turning things back on, which will eventually lead to some of the problems they encounter later in the season, but at this stage there was no outwardly sign of it. So Holden never stopped talking to Miller in the novels, and his focus was more on the conflict with Mercury, which frankly I found more interesting, so I'm going to give this a -2. So then we get a scene of Elvie alone in her lab talking to Fayaz, who's on the Edward Israel. Fayaz is studying the lightning activity and letting Elvie know where it's coming from. However, Elvie seems distracted, so Fayaz asks her what's wrong, and she explains that Mercury killed an unarmed Belter. Fayaz suggests that she return to the Edward Israel where it's safe, but she refuses, saying that she has too much work to do down here. Fayaz gives Elvie the source of the lightning as the alien structure, so she contacts Holden and says perhaps they should go there to investigate, but Holden explains that he's already there, which confuses her, but Holden refuses to elaborate. Elvie then announces that she's going there to join him. Holden tells her no, but she doesn't listen to him and insists that it's non-negotiable. So in the novels, I don't recall Elvie getting spooked by Murtry killing Coop. I don't think it was until later Elvie started to realize that he was a bad actor, as the novels set up a different situation where Elvie thought she was going to be killed by the militant Belters and she was fearful for her life, and she saw Murtry as her savior. So I don't think it was until much later that that image started to fade. Now, regarding Fayez, in the novels, Fayez was shown to have a close working relationship with Elvie, just like in the show. The major difference, however, is that in the books, he wasn't on the ship, he was on the planet with Elvie. And so I suspect the show changed this in order to put a known character on the Edward Israel, as in the books there was an entire storyline on the Edward Israel focused on a viewpoint character named Havelock, and he and his storyline were cut from the show entirely, so putting Fayez on the Israel was just a way to condense that storyline. As for Holden, suspiciously already being at the source of the lightning event, nothing like this happened in the novels. What they did with Elvie and Fayez works well for the dynamic they established in the show, so I'm going to give this a 0. So then we get to Mars, where Bobby Draper is trying to get a hold of her nephew David and having no luck. Eventually she gets a call from him saying that he's being held and the people holding her want to meet her. Bobby agrees to meet at the specified spot, and once she's there, she finds Lily, who tells her that she really fucked things up for David. Bobby tells her if she doesn't tell her where David is, she's going to have to wear more makeup to cover her bruises. But then a man sitting on the other side of her answers that David is fine. Bobby asks who he is, and he says that he's David's employer, that David used to cook for him, but since Bobby destroyed all of his equipment, David now owes him a debt, and David is working off that debt. He then tells Bobby that if she were to discreetly leave a door unlocked at her job, then David's debt would be considered paid. Bobby asks what they intend to steal, but Lily interrupts, saying that it's none of her fucking business. But Bobby retorts that she's not going to help them steal weapons. The man, SI, clarifies that they're not going to steal any weapons, so Bobby agrees to it and they part ways. So nothing like this in the novels happens, not even in the Gods of Risk noveletta. Closest comparison is that the drug dealer that David worked for had kidnapped Lily because she owed him a debt, so he said she was paying off her debts. And David tried to pay her debts all for her, but that didn't turn out well. So Bobby Draper just kicked his ass. So that's the closest comparison. And frankly, I think this is a more interesting storyline. Although I did find Lily very annoying in the scene, but still an improvement, so I'll give this a +1. So back on Ellis, we see Lucia in her clinic trying to treat victims. But her power is still out, and she calls to her daughter and husband to hurry with getting the power back on, as some of their medicines are perishable. But it's Naomi who calls back to her, telling her they should have the power back up in a minute. Lucia goes outside to see her daughter Felcia and her husband Jacob standing next to Naomi as she works to get the power back up. Felcia introduced her mother to Naomi, proudly saying that Naomi was educated at a university. Naomi modestly admits that it was just in the belt, nothing fancy like they have on Luna or Mars. But Felcia explains that she wants to go to university as well, and Jacob says anything is possible, but Lucia refutes that, saying that Felcia can't go because she's needed here at their new home. Felcia is upset by this and implies she feels trapped, but Lucia just orders her to go get some supplies. Once she's gone, Lucia thanks Naomi for her help, but asks her not to put those ideas in Felcia's head, as she's needed to stay here. So in the novels, Lucia's husband named Bazia, not Jacob, and their last name was Merchant, not Lazure, and they basically gave Bazia's book storyline to Lucia, but I'll get more into that later. However, in the novels, it was Bazia, not Lucia, who was very insistent that Felcia stay on Ellis with them, as Lucia was actually okay with it. Further, it was not Naomi whom Felsia got inspired by, but it was Elvie, as she approached Elvie about helping her to study at a university and built up a lasting rapport with Elvie. It wasn't until later that Basia found out about this, and he menacingly asked Elvie to stay away from his daughter. But I'm actually okay with them giving Basia's storyline to Lucia. It seems unnecessary, but it doesn't make things any worse. However, I'm more mixed on giving Elvie's storyline to Naomi, as for one, it gave Elvie more to do, but also it felt more meaningful that Felsia was reaching across enemy lines, so to speak, and striking up a friendship with an Earther, and it also helped Elvie to see that the Belters in a new light. Now, granted, I know the show has to condense storylines, and since Naomi is on the planet, they can use her more, but I don't think their relationship is nearly as powerful as Elvie's relationship to Felsia was in the books, so I'm going to give this a -3. So then we see Scotty approach Lucia about striking back against the RCA security men. Lucia asks if he's crazy after what they did to Coop, but Scotty insists that's exactly why they need to do it, for revenge. Lucia says that she wants nothing to do with it, but Scotty insists that she's part of this. Then we see Murtry in his own tent listening in to the conversation, as apparently he has them bugged or under surveillance. So in the novels, Lucia wasn't the one involved with the militant Belters, it was her husband Basia, and Basia actually went to a secret meeting where there were more angry Belters. There was like 20 of them, and they were plotting another attack on Murtry and his men, and Basia actively spoke out against this to the point of yelling at them, and so he was actually in danger of retribution from the other Belters. He asked his wife Lucia, who didn't want him to be involved in it anymore, and she suggested going to Holden, so he did. Also in the novels, Murtry also had the Belters under surveillance and was spying on them, but we didn't see him doing it like we do here. We just learned about it through him after the fact. However, actually hearing him listening in is a bit more menacing, also making it clear he knows Lucia's involved. So I'm going to give this a +1. So then we see Amos and Naomi working on getting the power back for the Belters, and Amos blows a circuit and asks Naomi if she has a backup generator, but she does not. Amos says that that's okay, and he goes over to the RCE tent and proceeds to just grab one of their generators. Now, Murtry had given strict orders not to help the Belters in any way, so when two RCE security men see Amos trying to take a generator, they try to stop him. Amos argues that they're not using it, but they say their orders are to only RCE personnel are allowed to use RCE equipment, so they tell Amos to put it back. He says okay, and then drops it on the guy's foot and uses the distraction to beat the ever-loving crap out of both of them. However, more security men come out of the tent and point guns at Amos, but then Wei comes out and tells them to let him have it. When they argue with her that it goes against Murtry's orders, Wei promises to square it with Murtry. She then goes up to Amos, who's calmly walking away with the generator, and asks if he wants to get shot. He simply says no, but she says not to try that shit again or she'll shoot him herself. He simply asks if that means they're not fucking anymore. Wei is caught off guard and says, no, it doesn't mean that, I guess not. Amos says, oh, that's cool, and walks away. Now, there wasn't really a scene like this in the books, although it's totally within Amos's character to just beat the crap out of anyone in his way. He and Wei were close, but they never had a direct conflict like this, at least not this early on. I love this scene to death. I think it's totally in line with all the characters. In fact, it's a very Amos thing to do and only adds to the humor, the characters, and the story, so I'm going to give this a +4. So then we go back to Earth, where Avasarala is in her office when Nancy Gal comes in and tenders her resignation, and Avasarala immediately accepts it. They then get into an argument on whether they should let colony ships go through the ring gates, where Avasarala brings up what's going on in Ellis, but Gal argues that they'll deal with whatever problems they encounter. That's the nature of their species. But Avasarala retorts right up until their species doesn't exist. Gal simply says she's looking forward to having this debate in public, and Avasarala concurs. So this means that Nancy Gal is running against Avasarala, trying to take her position. So none of this happened in the books. In the books, Nancy Gal was mentioned but never shown, and she was Secretary General of the UN at this time, not Avasarala. In fact, it is said that Avasarala was the force that helped Nancy Gal defeat Sorrento Gillis, and was the secret power behind Gal. But since we never got any scenes with her, we never learned what her position was, and there was never an active debate on whether or not colony ships should go through the ring gate. But I think it adds a lot to world building to show such a debate happening, as there are valid points on both sides, and it's right in line with the atmosphere in the books. We just didn't get to see it up close. So I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go to Mars, where we see Bobby Draper go to a police station and report that her nephew has been kidnapped. The officer at reception takes her information and tells her a detective will see her shortly. He sends her in, and she sees the same man who kidnapped her nephew introduce himself as Detective Isai Martin. And Bobby can't believe that he's a cop. He tells her that he hopes she understands the severity of the situation now, and explains that he's a noted detective with a high conviction record, and she's a disgraced ex-Marine. No one's going to believe her story. But he reassures her if she does the job that he asked her to do, she'll get her nephew back. She warns him that this better be a one-time thing, and that if he comes for her or her nephew again, that he better bring a gun, because she wouldn't feel right about killing an unarmed man. He simply smiles and tells her publicly, so other people can hear, that he'll help her find her nephew soon. So absolutely nothing like this occurred in the novels, not even the short story, The Gods of Risk. In fact, this is pretty much where Draper's storyline parts ways with The Gods of Risk and becomes an original story of the show, which is fine. As I said, I like how the show is focusing on different aspects of the universe, and it really illustrates how corrupt Mars has become. So I'm going to give this a +3. We then go back to Ellis, where we see Elvie reach Alex and Holden, and Elvie explains that the lightning came from the structure that expands well below the surface. Alex remarks that that's one hell of a circuit that Holden reconnected, and Elvie demands to know what he means, but Holden says that he's not at liberty to discuss it. But she suspects he knows more than he's saying. Fayez then chimes in on her hand terminal and tells her that he detected the lightning stopped at a chain of islands on the other side of the planet. Alex announces that the crisis has been averted, but then we zoom out to see the ground shake and collapse in on itself in the distance. Holden and the others can feel the ground shake, but when they report it to Fayez, he says that it's impossible as there's no tectonic activity on the planet. But he pinpoints the source of the earthquakes, and the three of them get in their vehicle and go to investigate. So in the novels, they detected some strange alien activity on the planet, so Holden, Elvie, Fayez, and Way go to investigate. As in the novels, Alex wasn't on the planet, and Fayez was. Further, Elvie wasn't questioning Holden the way she was here. In fact, she was kind of starstruck by him, as he's famous, and also she had a bit of a crush on him, which Fayez kind of made fun of her for, and it made Holden feel uncomfortable whenever he noticed. And boy, am I glad they ditched that storyline, as I really don't like love triangle type things, and it made Elvie come off as a bit silly to be so smitten by him. I think she's much more interesting of a character, the way she challenges him as it's obvious that he's hiding something. So I'm going to give this a +4. So we then go over to a bar where Amos is walking out when Murtry, who's sitting at a table with a flask in front of him on the table, calls out to Amos and tells him when he attacks his people, he puts himself and his whole crew at risk. Amos asks if that's a threat, but Murtry just says he's explaining the situation to him. Amos sits down at the table and grabs Murtry's flask, opens it, and starts drinking from it. Amos says that he knows who Murtry is, that he's a killer, and that his dick got hard when he killed that guy, and he can't wait to do it again. Murtry asks him if he's speaking from experience, and he answers no, but says one killer to another that he doesn't want to try that shit with him or his crew. Amos reaches for the flask again, but Murtry stops him holding the flask as they both are grabbing it. Murtry tells him that he thinks one day the two of them are going to end up bloody. Amos asks, how about right now? He's free right now. But Murtry simply takes the flask, packs it away, and leaves. So this is very similar to what happened in the novels, but there were some differences. The biggest one being that Holden was there. Holden and Amos were drinking at a bar when Murtry sat down at their table and offered them some of his whiskey, which Amos took gladly. He tried to make peace with them and explain that he was only doing what's best for his people, but Holden still insists that he's going to have him arrested when they turn to Earth. They have a debate where Murtry tries to defend and rationalize his actions, but Amos, who's been quiet this whole time, suddenly interrupts him and tells Murtry that he knows who he is, he's a killer, and all that shit that he's saying right now is just an excuse for him to kill people, which is what he gets off on. Amos then tells him if he tries that shit with him or his crew, that he'll regret it. Holden warns Amos to back off, but Amos ignores him. Murtry says that sounded like a threat, and Amos smiles and confirms that it really was. Now, this has strong connotations, as Murtry had just said that he has the right to kill anyone who threatens him or his men, and in fact, he just did that. So Amos confirmed that he was threatening him. And then they had the same exchange where Murtry says that he thinks they're going to end up bloody one day, and Amos says that he's free right now. And that's when Holden realized that they both had their hands under the table, and Holden started to freak out, thinking that they would draw on each other. And after a few very tense moments, Murtry calmly gets up and leaves. Now, as much as I love this scene in the show, I do have to admit I love this scene in the books even more. I think having Holden there adds to it a lot, as the debate is between Holden and Murtry, but Amos just interrupts to goad him and to taunt him. Even right after Murtry showed how dangerous he is, Amos makes it clear that he doesn't give a fuck. And the moment when Holden realizes that they both could draw on each other was super intense. I dare say even more so than the show's version. But don't get me wrong, I love the show's version too, but I think the book's version is slightly better and more intense, so I'm going to give this a -1. So then we get a scene where Murtry goes to Lucia and asks for his help with his leg as it's been bothering him. So she takes him into her clinic and she has a look at it. Meanwhile, he tries to probe her about Scotty and the other militant belters. As we saw earlier, he's spying on them, so he knows that she's involved, but he tries to pry it out of her, but she denies it. He insists that he wants a peaceful resolution and thinks that she does too, but she has no response to that. Then Naomi comes in and interrupts them, yelling at Murtry for killing a man in cold blood. Murtry tries to insist that his men were attacked first, but Naomi yells that they're not going to let him get away with this. However, as she's yelling, she starts having troubles breathing and collapses to the ground. And while Lucia moves to help her, Murtry uses this time to make his escape. Now, I can only try to interpret Murtry's motivations here, as some might say that he's trying to manipulate Lucia into turning on her belters and giving them up. But I'm not sure I see it that way, as we soon see he already has all the dirt he needs on the Belters. I think he's trying to test her to see if she's with the militant Belters or not, as he knows from monitoring their conversation that she has some connection to them. I think he's giving her a chance to renounce them, and if she did, he wouldn't go after her. But because she didn't, that's why he does eventually go after her later on. That's just my guess, though, because nothing like this happened in the books. In the books, as I stated, Basia did go to Holden and warn him about the attacks, and in turn, Holden warned Mertry about the attacks. But by this stage, Mertry was already posed to attack the Belters, so he didn't care that Basia had warned Holden, and he wanted to arrest Basia as well. So, if my read is correct, that makes this quite different from the novels, where he's giving Lucia the chance to turn on the Belters, and because she doesn't, he condemns her for that. And I actually find that much more interesting. Plus, I love the subtlety of this scene, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we see Fayez directing Holden, Alex, and Elvie out to the source of the tremors and tells them that they should be seeing it. We see the three of them standing on a hillside looking into the distance in awe, and Alex exclaims, "Holy shit." We then see they're looking at one of those weird alien structures, turning around really fast, digging up the ground as it causes tremors. So this didn't happen in the novels. Instead, when Holden, Elvie, and Fayez and Way went to investigate the strange activity, they saw a weird insectoid-like mechanical being struggling to come alive. In the novels, these beings appeared before in Book 3 at the station in the ring space and came alive to kill the Marines who were hunting Holden in the third novel. But the one here is described as more dysfunctional, and Holden likens it to a dying animal. This giant earth-shattering structure causing earthquakes, however, is much more exciting and really ups the stakes much more than a mechanical dying insect, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go back to Mars, where after Bobby Draper leaves the door open at her work as instructed, she sees two people she identifies as Belters collect the material. She then is instructed to meet SI on an active tube, and she does so with a makeshift knife in her hand just in case she needs it. Draper asks where her nephew is, and SI stalls, but then eventually tells her that he's safely at home. She calls him and finds this to be the case, so she asks SI why he didn't just tell her this in the first place, and he replies that he wanted to see how far he could push her before she shivved him. He then suggests that she work for him, as she could use someone with her skill set on his team who's able to provide valuable equipment. She refuses and presses him about how selfish he is and that how she's not a criminal. But Isai tries to convince her Mars is changing and that she doesn't owe them anything after what they did to her, and then leaves her to think about it. So this is where Draper's storyline really starts to leave the Gods of Risk material, as in the noveletta, a thug tried to blackmail David by kidnapping Lily, and Draper beat the crap out of him, and that was the end of that. But here the situation is much more complicated, as Isai is a lot more dangerous. So the novels never had a story of Bobby Draper being, enticed into the criminal underworld, but this does touch on how Mars is starting to come apart now that the ring gates have been discovered, and it does it in an interesting way through an interesting character story about Bobby starting to reevaluate her worldviews as the political situation continues to evolve rapidly. So I'm going to give this a +2. We then go back to Illis, where we see Naomi waking up in a clinic where Lucia warns her that she's not adjusting to the gravity. Naomi insists that she'll be fine, but Lucia tells her how when the Belters first colonized the planet, there were many who also didn't adjust well to the gravity, and a couple people also insisted that they were fine, right up until they ended up dying a couple of days later. She then makes it clear to Naomi that if she doesn't leave the gravity well soon, she'll die. Naomi doesn't seem to want to hear it and walks out. So as I mentioned earlier, Naomi never stayed on the surface for any amount of time, so we have no idea how she would have adjusted to the gravity in the novels. Also, we never got as detailed of a telling of how hard it was for the Belter colonists to adjust to the gravity and how many of them didn't survive. So not only does this serve to create a ticking clock situation where Naomi's life is in danger, it also adds extra texture to the Belter colonists and their situation. So ultimately it adds a lot to the story. So I'm going to give this a +4. So then we go back to Holden, Alex, and Elvie watching the strange alien structure tear up the ground, and Elvie calculates that its current path leads it straight to the settlement where it will destroy it. Alex suggests that now might be a good time for Holden to talk to Miller, so Holden steps back and seems to be considering it, but instead he decides the better course of action is for the Rosinante to fire a missile at it. Elvie is upset and loudly objects, saying that they have no idea of the repercussions and she needs time to study it, but Holden simply says they need to destroy it before it destroys them. So he has the Rosinante fire a missile at it, and it destroys the structure that collapses into the ground. So in the novels, as I mentioned, it was just a malfunctioning insectoid-like creature, and Wade decided to shoot at it. Holden objects, telling her that she's crazy, that it could kill them, and she says that's why she needs to kill it first. And she is successful in destroying it. However, this incident is what spooks Holden and makes him decide they need to evacuate the planet, and it's nowhere near as dire as the situation is here in the show, with a giant earth-shattering pillar threatening to destroy the settlement. Also, I think it's implied here that having the Rosinante fire a missile that destroys it is what leads to the disasters that they will face later in the season, which wasn't the case in the books, which makes Holden's instinct to violence come back to bite him in the ass, which I like, as well as the fact that the stakes are upped tremendously, so I'm going to give this a +5. So then we see Scotty and the other militant Belters having a meeting in a hut where they plan to attack Mercury, but when they hear the sound of the explosion of the missile hitting the structure, they decide to leave, but before they can, gas canisters are thrown into the hut, disorientating them, and as soon as they try to stumble out, Mercury and his security team are right outside to shoot them, and they end up killing all of them. And as Scotty lies dying on the ground, Mercury stands over him, points his gun at him, and says that he hopes this answers his question, and then he kills him. So in the novels, the shootout sequence goes on for much longer. I believe the structure that is shot at is described as being much bigger, more like a normal house. Also, Mercury wasn't there initially in the novels. He was in a meeting with Holden and Carol Chiwiwi, where Holden warned him that the Belters were planning an attack and told him they all needed to evacuate the planet. But Mercury refused, to the point where it nearly became a showdown between Holden and Mercury, where Holden almost pulled his gun on him, but they were interrupted by Mercury ordering his men to attack the Belters, and Holden went to intercede. In fact, he got right in the line of fire, trying to save some of the Belters. Also in the novels, it wasn't smoke gas, it was fire, as they full-on set the house the Belters were in on fire and shot at those who tried to escape. And when Holden tried to save someone, the RCA security men wanted to shoot at him too, but Mercury ordered them not to. So I'm not sure which version I prefer. I kind of think having Holden there doesn't add anything, and perhaps the show's more simple, straightforward version works better. But on the other hand, I do miss the showdown that almost occurred between Holden and Mercury at the meeting with Carol Chiwiwi, as that was super intense. So I'm going to split the difference and give this a 0. So my final adaptation score for Subduction is a +24. This episode started a bit slow, but eventually it ramped up the tension more than the novels did and explored character beats the novels missed out, making this a pretty good adaptation. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 4 Episode 3. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to explore The Expanse Season 4 with episode reviews and book to show comparison videos. And check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Star Trek and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.